Hi, third graders. It's good to see you coming to check your DMA for today. I want to give you a nice pat for making sure that you are doing your problems correctly. So thank you for coming and checking your DMA. It's good to see you. We're going to look at week 8. We're on day 2. So looking at our first problem, we have how many people entered the bake-off in 2001 and 2002? So you will notice that here in your problem, you have a bar graph. And in the bar graph, the title says bake-off entries. That's how many people entered. The word entry means the word entered. How many people entered this contest, this bake-off contest? Now, if you look at your scale, you'll notice it goes from 0 to 200. This little squiggly mark right here says that they did not have anything less than 200, so they started their scale. You always have to show 0, but you also are going in groups of 50 here. So they went from 200 to 250, or 250, 250 to 300, 300 to 350, and 350 to 500. So, if you'll notice, it says about here. And that is because if you notice this bar, it's not exactly on 250, but it's also not exactly on 100. It's in between those, and it's not even touching the next interval, which would be 225, which is in between our 50s. So this is actually 225. This would be 275. My apologies. I should have started here in between these two. 225, 250, 275, 300, 325, 350, 375. So these are actually going in intervals by 25. But the 50 marks are what's being shown as the major pieces of data. Now, if you'll notice, since it's about, it's not going to be exactly. So we're looking at 250, and it's almost to 275. So it's somewhere in between there. So I would say that we're going to choose 275 as our about for 2001. And for 2002, our about 375. 375. Now, if we were going to round these to the closest 10 or the closest 100, we could do either of those. So if I were going to round to the closest 100, 275 would round to 300, and 375 would round to 400, and when I add those together, I get 700, about 700 entries, about 700. Now, if I were going to round these to the closest 10, round this to 280, I could round it to 280, and I could round 375 to 380, and this would give us a much closer estimate as to about how many there are, because we're rounding to the closest 10 now instead of the closest 100. And 80 plus 80 is 160, and 300 plus 200 is 500. So 500 plus 160 would give us 660, which is still close to 700 if we were going to round. However, we know that when we do add the exact amounts, we're going to come up with something more along the lines of 660, since it's going to be a more true, closer estimate. So now let's look at our addition sentence here. And we have three addends. We have 15, 37, and 10. Those are the three parts that we're adding together to come up with a whole sum. We call that a sum. Now, we can use our break apart strategy and add the tens first. So we could add 10, 30, and 10. And 30 and 10 is 40, plus another 10 would be 50. We could add the ones, which would be 5, 7, and we don't have any 10s here, so we don't add that 0, but we're going to go ahead and just leave it there just so that we know that that's not missing. And if you don't know what 7 plus 5 is, you could use your 5 plus 5, which you know is 10. You could break this apart as 5 and 2. And when you add 5 plus 5, that's 10. And 2 more would make your 12. Now, what does that tell me? I had enough ones to make a 10. So that 10 is going to be added to my tens place here, which is 50. And now I'm going to have 62 as my sum, or my total. So here I have three parts to add together. Most of the time we just add-ins, but today there are three add-ins that we had to add up together to come up with our sum. Now, another way that we could look at this is we could look at it as starting with our larger amount, and then we could add the two groups of 10 that we just have from here and here, and that would give me 57, and 57 plus 5, and I don't have any ones here, so I'm just adding 5, and 5 and 7 is going to make that 12, which is that other 10 that I'm going to add here to my 50, and that's going to make 62. Now, we also know that we can use our algorithm, but we also remember that we also need some other strategies to prove that we're correctly getting our sum. So remember that 7 and 5 is going to come up with that 12 that we did here. And when I carry that 10, I'm carrying that 10. It's not a 1, it's a 10. And I'm carrying that 10 to my tens place from this 12 that I just added in my ones. So I had 12 ones, but I had enough to carry and regroup as a 10. So now I have 1 10, 2 10s, 3, 4, 5 10s, which is 50, plus one more 10 is 60. 6 10s makes 60, which now I have 62. So we have shown this 3 different ways, and still, remember, you should come up with the same sum each time. If we look at our next group of problems, we have write the number as a word. So this number is 212. We're going to write it as a word, and we start with our hundreds, so we can write the number in words 200. 12 we write together because once we get to 20, then we start breaking it apart as 21 or 22. But up till 20, everything is in the teens, or it's just single, like 7 or 9. So once we say 12, the 10 and the ones are written together as in the teens. So 212. If we were to write this in expanded form, and I just want to just quickly remind you that they're not asking you to do this, but remember that you can take apart a number by its place value and show each digit as what it's worth, what's its value. So the 2 has a value of 200. The 1 digit has a value of 10, and the 2 digit has a value of 2. So when I add this number back together from expanded form to standard form, it's still going to mean 212. Okay, our next problem has to do with rounding, and we're getting better at this, but some of us are still struggling with remembering that we see the word about. So that means they don't want an exact amount. That is also included in word problems. So if they say about how many, then we know that we're going to be rounding that number. And in this case, it says to round each number to the nearest 100, then add. Okay? So here's my hundreds place. I have a 200 and a 400. This 200 tells me that I have this number falls between my 200 and the next 100, which is 300. And remember, 250 is going to be right in the middle. So if we think about where 261 is, it would lie right about there on a number line. We have 487. That tells us that this number is between 400, since I have a 4 in the hundreds place, and the next 100, which is 500. Remember, what's in the middle? Right, in between your hundreds is 50. So when I think about where 487 is going to be, it's going to be a little bit further to the right of 450, maybe right about there. We're just estimating, right? So if you look at 250, 261 is going to round to the closest 100, which is 300. 487 is past the 450, so we know that it's going to be closer to 500. And then it says, then add. That's going to tell us that we add those two rounded amounts to equal 800. So if I were to add these, I would find that they are close to 800. So let's see. Let's see if that actually works out. So I'm just going to real quickly, I'm going to take my 261 and my 487, and I know that 200 and 400 is 600, and I know that 60 and 80, now I know 60 plus 60 is 120, so another 10 would be 70, which would be 130, plus 60 plus 80 would be 140. 140, and then I have my ones, which is 8, and when I add my 600 and one more 100 is 700. 740 plus 8 is 748. So, is 748 going to be close to 800? Yes. Now, if this said 600 or maybe 900, not going to be close. We're off by too much. So, as long as it's in between this 700 and that 800 about, then you're going to be close to that 748. So, keep on practicing that rounding and using your addition and your subtraction skills, and eventually we will be very fluent at this. Come back tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be doing DMA Week 8, Day 3, and it's so great for you guys to be coming and checking these. Improve your skills, so keep it up.